Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1840. We will today continue with the article by Francis Y. Lynn, Wittgenstein on Understanding and Emotion, Grammar and Methods. Last time we looked into how the context in the form of all relations, everything that is going on in the universe is participating, are constantly having a look-see. The person's knowledge, if you remember aspect seeing from Paul Johnston and Joachim Schulte, Rethinking the Inner by Paul Johnston and Expression and Emotion by Joachim Schulte goes deep into aspect seeing and how all the context, all the relations in the world lead to you seeing either a duck or a rabbit, or what the meaning of afraid is going to be in that particular circumstance. And for you, it's a re-entering of the observer who takes a most decisive role. No longer being an passive listener in, but actively involved in everything. And I like the example of the poem we had last time. I didn't read from it. It's from Remarks on the Philosophy of Psychology. And how, well, I'll read the whole thing or part of it. A poem makes an impression on us as we read it. Do you feel the same while you read it as when you read something indifferent? How have I learned to answer this question? Perhaps I shall say, of course not. Which is as much to say, this takes hold of me and the other not. I experience something different. And what kind of thing? I can give no satisfactory answer. And I skip a vote. If you answer, I enjoyed it earlier or later, I don't want to say that. But now, surely you remember sensations and images as you read. They are such as to connect up with the enjoyment, with the impression. So you cannot separate them in a what can you say, rational fashion. They are, and I like this phrase, interwoven into each other and not things that you can dissect like a surgeon or a person working in a laboratory. It's deeply ingrained with each other and getting force and meaning and understanding from each other. The very idea of separation is an illusion in itself. It simply is not real. These deep connections, yes, very good, but they got their significance only from the surroundings. Geschichte, as I mentioned before, is the complexities of things that happened before. And we need a new word because history equals written or oral history or explicit history. That is solely the top of the iceberg. What has happened is an enormity. And that is actually true even for classical physics already there. What happened before, what went on before is an enormity that can never ever be captured to any degree. We will continue on page 14. And we ended with problems in 1837. And we've been speaking of different methods of Wittgenstein. And I just repeat it very quickly. Meaning consideration, learning consideration, and multi-words. Those are all important, although represented by different authors. Multi-voices is by Stern, also something to look into. Stern, S-T-E-R-N. These are the methods of Wittgenstein. And I think for many readers, it could be very helpful to learn that, for instance, in philosophical investigations, when you read a line, you need to see it in its context to understand if it's the voice of Wittgenstein, the interlocutor, or the questioner. That is very important. Makes for a lot of confusion otherwise. And of course, that is a very different way of writing a book, not with what we are used to. And I continue. Second paragraph, left column in the conclusion at page 14. All these methods also share a feature. They are all used to present grammatical facts. which every competent speaker knows about. For instance, for example, I now understand can be used in the four situations described in PI paragraph 151. For another example, it is imaginable that some people who speak more precisely can have different words to express the thoughts mentioned in ppf 74, which we can express using only one word, afraid. These methods give content and life to the idea of a grammatical investigation. When we understand the methods Wittgenstein uses in the case of understanding and emotion, we find Wittgenstein's relevant remarks much easier to understand, which at first sight might seem to be incomprehensible. I believe that concentrating on Wittgenstein's methods will also be useful and essential too for us to understand Wittgenstein's dissolution of other philosophical problems. It can be expected that some or all of the methods examined in this paper are to be found in Wittgenstein's remarks on other topics. Indeed, a number of these methods are used by Wittgenstein to deal with thinking. It is also to be expected that some additional methods are employed by Wittgenstein to tackle other philosophical problems, e.g., for instance, the problem of private language and the problem of fear as a mental state. Before ending this paper, I would like to discuss the notion of a surveyable presentation. In DT, Wittgenstein emphasizes the importance of a surveyable representation of grammar, and this he repeats in PI 122. What is a surveyable representation of grammar? No satisfactory explication has been offered in the literature. The present paper suggests an explanation. There's an indefinite number of grammatical rules for the words in a given language. There's little point in presenting them all or in a random way. We need to select only those grammatical rules which bear directly on the philosophical problem at hand and represent them in such a way to make the problem disappear. For example, consider viewing the problem of sudden understanding as a mental process. Initially, we do not know how to deal with this problem. The grammar of the expression "I now understand" seems unable to help us. It seems to be too hazy. we understand the expression and know how it is used, yet we seem unable to bring the relevant grammatical rules into view. But we can list the circumstantial rules for the expression, as Wittgenstein does in PI 151. When we have done this, we can then command an overview of them and consequently see that sudden understanding is not a mental process. The listing of the circumstantial rules in PI 151 then becomes a surveyable representation. Notice the contribution of the method of sufficiency. This method actually does the surveying job. We survey the process, mental or physical, which occur when one suddenly understands. And we see that no process is sufficient for understanding. Hence, both the method of rule listing and that of sufficiency contribute to obtaining a surveyable representation of grammar. Other methods I discussed in this paper also make their contributions. I can therefore describe the situation as this. The method is to obtain a surveyable representation, and the methods are means to achieve this goal. And there I end the reading of Wittgenstein on understanding and emotion. Grammar and methods. And we now went into the methods. I would cross-read as I do sometimes, and this will be yet another article by the most honored Warren Goldfarb. Something that he sent to me, but as you see, it can also be found on the net. Because there is a link there. Rule following revisited. Warren Goldfarb. This chapter argues that Wittgenstein does not aim, as many interpreters suggest, to show that our practices of rule following are groundless. But, this is why I like Goldfarb, he does not, nor does he aim to show that these practices are grounded in any philosophical sense of these terms. Rather, Wittgenstein wishes to undermine the very notions of grounds and groundlessness that philosophers attempt to employ in discussions of rule following. The mistake that many of Wittgenstein's readers make, it is argued, is to suppose that questions of justification or explanation concerning rule following can be appropriately posed quite generally. That is, without respect to particular ordinary cases in which a need for justification or explanation arises. It is here where Wittgenstein's emphasis on practice is important. The practices that Wittgenstein has in mind are not merely, as many interpreters have assumed, the practices of how to proceed in certain cases. That we put 102 after 1,000 when following the instruction, add 2, for instance. But they crucially include the practices we engage in when questions of justification and grounds arise in ordinary contexts. What we say and do in those situations. Wittgenstein, like any other charismatic thinker, continues to attract fanatics who devote their life to disagreeing with one another about the ultimate meaning of his words. These disciples cling myopically to their Wittgenstein, not realizing that there are many great Wittgensteins to choose from. Dennett, would that be Daniel Dennett? No doubt. Not too bad. I am, and I begin, I admit, a fanatic. I'd like to find out the meaning of Wittgenstein's words, even their ultimate meaning, if that's different. In this chapter, I am going to discuss the rule following considerations: philosophical investigations, paragraphs 185 to 242. Those considerations were first marked out as of crucial significance in Michael Dummett's 1959 essay, Wittgenstein's Philosophy of Mathematics. And the amount of discussion of them exploded after the publication of Saul Kripke's book, Wittgenstein on Rules and Private Language, in 1982. That discussion did not generate much consensus, but there does seem to be continued interest. Though, as evidenced by the publication of, in 2002, of an anthology excuse me, of papers on the topic from earlier decades. What is striking about most of those papers is the absence of focus on the actual text of the investigations. Paragraphs were cited, to be sure, but there was little by the way of sustained reading or attention to how the text is structured. My aim here is try to formulate a little more clearly than I have found in the literature what is going on in these sections of the investigations, and to integrate a general view of what Wittgenstein is up to with closer textual examinations. That's the parable. The question is, what is it meant to show? After all, it is not an uncommon experience to discover that someone whom we thought understood us turns out not to understand us at all. To understand us after all. To understand you after all. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. The rule following considerations begin in Philosophical Investigations, paragraph 185, with the parable of the wayward child. We give the child a rule, add 2, and she carries on just fine until she hits 1,000. Then she continues with 1,004, 1,008, 1,012. She has given every indication of understanding the number system, understanding what commands are and the like, and up to 1,000 she goes on in a way that is perfectly correct, but she does something quite odd starting at 1,000. Moreover, the wayward child doesn't see that she's doing anything different. So Wittgenstein asks, what do we do to get the child to see? If she insists that she's going on as before, going on as she should, we come to see that there is nothing in all the explanations and examples we had given before, which had sufficed to get her to proceed correctly up to 1,000, which rules out her way of going on. That's the parable. And if we can go go up a bit. The question is, what is it meant to show? After all, it is not an uncommon experience to discover that someone who we thought understood us turns out not to understand us after all. Everything that the person has done heretofore has given us no reason to doubt whether he understands, but he suddenly does something that shows that for all that he doesn't. Less common, but not unknown. We see cases in which no explanation seems to work. Yet obviously, Wittgenstein is giving a truly bizarre case. The child doesn't get the idea of adding to, even though she evinced a complete understanding up until 1,000. The child simply disagrees with our judgment on what going on the same is. What can we do? We can throw up our hands and say that she is incapable of getting it right and send her home or to a psychologist, or we can force her to continue in the way we prefer. Of course, the parable is meant to evoke a further response. It is meant to be disquieting. Our examples or explanations do not suffice to rule out the child's response. The disquiet comes from this further reflection. So we can go up a bit. What the parable shows is that there is nothing in anything we can say about the rule that mandates the continuation to go one way rather than another. So there is always a question whether the child understands. At any point when someone appears as though she's gotten the rule, subsequent events could show that she hasn't. When someone appears as though she's gotten the rule, subsequent events could show that she hasn't. Hence, at any point, there is always a question: has she gotten the rule? All that we have to go on are particular finite manifestations, so there can never be any assurance that the person actually has gotten the rule. The disquiet that then sets in comes from the way that the worry just articulated leads to a further question. What tells us that we are going on in the right way? Nothing we've said rules out the child's response. How is it that we are confident that we have the right answer? What is the source of our authority if it cannot be conclusively stated? There are various directions in which this question might be taken. There's an epistemological way. How does anyone know what going on in the right way is? How can we tell when someone has got it correctly? This doesn't seem to me the right question. For to ask after the source of our authority is to raise the question of what sets up what is right and wrong, in accordance with the rule or not at all. What gives content to the judgment of right and wrong, and what power it has. Given that the examples and the explanations do not seem to force one way on us, how does anything count as correct or incorrect? This is a question of the constitution of correctness. It does not concern our justification in taking ourselves to be right. The example is not to shake our confidence that we are right when we proceed in a particular way, but rather to get us to ask what it is to say that we are right. And that is definitely much more important, and I'll underline it here. And we take a pause there. Right is the last word. And there is some confusion, so the pages here, but this is page 75 in my edition. And it seems to be page 2 in the PDF. So this parallels nicely with Francis Y. Lin. And I'm using Goldfarb here almost like a set of important instructions about Wittgenstein. Who else would say that this is not meant to shake our confidence that we are right when we proceed in a particular way, but rather to look at what it means to say that we are right? That is a different question altogether. But now to Lin, if you may, and we look at what is a surveyable representation of grammar. You see that there are some nice parallels here. And that will be on page 14, left column. And it's at the end. The penultimate sentence on the left column. What is a surveyable representation of grammar? No satisfactory explication has been offered in the literature. The present paper suggests an explanation. And listen now, there is an indefinite number of grammatical rules for the words in a given language. There's little point in presenting them all or in a random way. We need to select only those grammatical rules which bear directly on the philosophical problem at hand and represent them in such a way to make the problem disappear. So it's where they are used, and that gets clarified in a couple of sentences down. Initially, and of course, let me mention this, for example, if we think it's a mental process, we will not reach understanding of this. Or if we think it's a change of internal state, we would simply not understand what is a surveyable representation of grammar. So therefore, it's important to approach the ideas of mentality to be process, activity, or a state, or a change of state, anything of that. And as we see here, the grammar of the expression "I now understand" seems unable to help us. It seems to be too hazy. We understand the expression and now know how it's used, and yet we seem unable to bring the relevant grammatical rules into view. But what we can do, we can have circumstantial rules, context-dependent rules for the expression, which is done in Wittgenstein 151, PI 151. Then we can have some sort of command. And as we see, and Lin says, the listing of the circumstantial rules in PI 151 then becomes a surveyable representation. This is complex, but let me expand this. You can think of the mental process, idea, or misconception as the Big Bang of psychology. A thing that hides. Lee Smalling used to say, and Julian Barber as well, once you invent the Big Bang, you get all the classical strict permanent rules, laws. Once you get the idea of a mental process, you get the idea of determinism, of classical rules of thinking. Wittgenstein says those general rules do not apply because mental action is a mistaken belief. The rules are circumstantial. They are particular, they are not general, they offer a certain moment in time and space with a certain context. So generalizing and universalizing is very problematic, but it stems from the idea of the mental as an activity, or the emotion as an activity. I think you now understand why Lin brought up emotion, because it leads to another, I'd say, rather unexpected problem. The idea of fixed rules. We mentioned fixed rules before, and this is exactly what Goldfarb takes up, the fixity of rules. He made a whole series of fixity of rules before. Here we have a revisiting of that. That's why the methods of Wittgenstein are so important. And Lin is, I think indirectly, maybe I am sort of putting too much into Lin here, but maybe Lin is saying that all three different varieties of Wittgenstein are important. The meaning consideration, the learning consideration, and multi-words. They all play in to loosen up a rigid understanding of what a rule is. Wittgenstein is not a post-relativist or a postmodernist. He says there are very strict rules, but they are dependent in the situation. They do not always apply, as with the word afraid. The rule for how we interpret the word afraid differs. So instead of having different words for afraid, that is suggested by multi-words idea, we have different rules in different circumstances. Those are the circumstantial rules. And to make this a little bit clearer, we can go to the abstract of Warren Goldfarb, which wasn't in my paper. It's this chapter argues that Wittgenstein does not aim, as many interpreters to suggest, to show that our practices of rule following are groundless. But nor does he aim to show that these practices are grounded in any listener philosophical sense of these terms. This is a quite different way of expressing what Francis Lynn said, because we cannot even think in something like circumstantial rules. At least I cannot initially. But we can learn to understand it once we do, as suggested here, to undermine the ideas of grounds and groundlessness, those two opposing teams, and you will end up with something much more healthy, the circumstantial rule, which is also suggested by Lee Smolin and Carlo Rovelli. Different application of rules in different situations seems like, I don't know, magic. It seems like utterly alien to our life form, but it is not. It is actually what's taking place. And our constant fighting with monosemic ideas and the idea of the mental is caused by a generalized misunderstanding. And that general misunderstanding are the universal laws, or the universal grammar, which is the most extreme case, by Noam Chomsky, who seems to be saying in some odd way that there is no freedom whatsoever, something that he often repeats in interviews. What he means by that is it's more than obscure, but he is a terror example of reductio in absurdum if you go too far. I think most of us common people, we're somewhere in between. If we go to page 75, or could be 74 in your variety here. Yes, it's 74 actually. For to ask after the source, it's 3 lines down on the last paragraph. For to ask after the source of our authority is to raise the question of what sets up what is right or wrong, in accordance with the rule or not at all, what gives content to the judgment of right or wrong, and what power it has. So go far with starting with what we usually think philosophy to be, with generalized rules. And that is getting undermined here. And the wayward child is an example of Wittgenstein where that gets questioned. Go to the next page. No, this is the same page in yours. This is a question of the constitution of correctness. It does not concern our justification, listen now, in taking ourselves to be right. The example is not meant to shake our confidence that we are right when we proceed in a particular way, but rather to get us to ask what it is to say that we are right. It may sound like splitting hairs, but trust me, it isn't. But the important thing is to remember at this stage, it doesn't want to shake our confidence when we are right, and we do think we're right, as Francis Lin. What color you just came in? Please talk.
Okay,
It's scary.
let
I was
me.
just thinking to say, come in, color.
Thank you, thank you. Let me open philosophical investigations. This is, I like this text because it has also the German text and with the English translation.
And you have the three great names, Anscombe, Hacker, and Joachim Schulte.
Let me see if I can find the passage. And I actually, do I write it correctly? No, it doesn't. I want to find the passage from the favor side at once, but let me go like this. Let me see. Can you tell me which is the paragraph of the Wayward Child?
No, I won't be able. I read it years ago in the Swedish edition.
No, let me. So in Kolvarp, it's the paragraph. Let me see. Paragraph 185. Let's go to paragraph 185. Paragraph 185. No, there is something strange about this new translation. I don't know if it's a new translation, but so 185. So here. So it begins actually on the previous page. We could take it from the beginning there. Let us return to our example. Now judged by the user criteria.
It's a pupil here instead of a child in this translation.
Yes, that was the problem. The pupil has mastered the series of natural numbers. Next, we teach him to write down the other series of cardinal numbers and get him to the point of writing down the series of the form at an order of the form plus n, so at the order of plus 1, blah blah blah. Okay, so we have then, he arrives at 1000, then we get the pupil to continue one series, say plus 1 beyond 1000, and he writes 1000, 1004, 1008, 1012. We say to him, look what you are doing. He doesn't understand. We say, you should have added 2. Look how you began the series. He answers, yes, isn't it right? I thought that was how I had to do it. Or suppose he pointed to the series and said, but I did go on in the same way. It would now be no use to say, but can't you see? Go over the old explanations and examples for him again. In such a case, we might perhaps say, this person finds it natural, once given our explanations, to understand our order as we would understand the order at 2 up to 1000, 4 to 2006 up to 3000 and so on. This case would have similarities to that in which it comes naturally to a person to react to the gesture pointing with the hand by looking in the direction from fingertip to wrist rather than from wrist to fingertip. Let me see, this translation doesn't seem to speak about a wayward child. I think it's only in the old translation, the second edition, the first edition. So, and I would like, so that's the reason why I wanted to check out the German text. What the Schüler is the German word for the pupil. And let me check also the German here. Okay, so I think this gives a new understanding. Because if Wittgenstein would say, this is a wayward child, it would be like pointing a finger at this person. So today I got a new understanding of this paragraph 185. So I think one of the points here is that there are no a priori rules existing in the universe.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Instead, Wittgenstein's point is that we say to him, so he doesn't understand. So where is the key phrase? Let me see. This person finds it natural. Okay, so it's subjective. His understanding and our understanding. So it's about pointing out, and it's about doing exercises. And I think also Wittgenstein is here, so to say, attacking the Augustinian view, pointing out ostensive definitions.
Yes, you actually have the two things of Francis Lin there. He's excellent. You both have, as you say correctly, the ostensive definition, and you also have traits of explanation. And the explanation you find further down the page, 2 up to 100, 4 up to 2000, or something like that. That will be the equivalent of what is a bachelor, and you answer an unmarried man.
Yes. So the pupil counts 1010, writes 1004, but here Wittgenstein actually adapts his explanation to fit this pupil, because the pupil actually is actually following this rule now. Do you understand? Do you get my point?
Yes, it's not Wittgenstein speaking here. I would say distinct interlocutor.
So I think that actually, this we would say, so that is say Wittgenstein himself, unlike ordinary people.
Mm.
So he actually goes back one way back, and Wittgenstein takes the position of the pupil to defend him. So I think Wittgenstein is actually here defending the student. Don't you agree?
Mm. Yeah,
Or,
maybe. Yeah.
no, because if you see this, add 2 up to 1000,
Mm.
so far good. But then
Mm.
the student actually adds 4.
Yes.
So he's actually doing what this example does here. Do you see?
Yeah.
Wittgenstein goes in here to defend the pupil.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
So
It's
he actually adapts a
mm.
posteriori
Yeah.
what the student was doing.
Mm. Yeah.
So my
But
and
it's not Wittgenstein who writes this. This is the commentator, the other voice.
no, I don't think
Yeah.
no, because Hans, so what is the student doing? So the
Yeah.
student is writing 1004, but if you
Mm.
actually see here,
Mm.
um, he's so he's actually following this rule.
It
So
seems
from
that way.
1004,
Yeah, it seems that way, yes.
actually the student is actually doing this, but
Maybe.
is an a
Maybe.
posteriori invented.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know what's going to happen at 2000.
Yeah, no, but that's irrelevant for this discussion, I would say. But so far in this example, he has actually Wittgenstein adapted a posteriori to this person.
Yeah,
He's
as
giving
the
two rules, uh,
mm,
so to say. So he's flexible, Wittgenstein here, I think. And to return to what Kolfarp's point here, page 185, no, excuse me, 75. How does anything count as correct or incorrect? I agree with Kolfarp here. This is a question of the constitution of correctness. It does not concern our justification in taking ourselves to be right. The example is not meant to shake our confidence that we are right when we proceed in a particular way, but rather to get us to ask what is to say.
Yeah, it's correct.
So what Wittgenstein is doing in my interpretation to rehearse it. So Wittgenstein is actually giving here 2 rules. One is an unusual rule, but a flexible one that, so to say, Wittgenstein invents a posteriori in order to accommodate or defend the pupil. Because I'm certain that the student is actually following this. So let me see this so I don't misunderstand. It would now to be no use to say, but can't you see? And go over the old explanations and examples for him again. In such a case, you might perhaps say, this person finds it natural, once given our explanations, to understand our order as we would understand the order.
Yeah.
At 2 up to 1000, 4 to 2000. So is not this precisely what the child is doing? So he has now, he has actually done like this exactly.
He has done like that up to 1000, but then we don't know. But it's as you say, it's Wittgenstein is coming in as the commentator and offering a suggestion to defend the child or the pupil.
That's my point and my understanding. So
Yeah,
it's giving with this a posteriori rule, he is actually undermining a priori thinking.
Yes. He's showing an alternative, and this is the many voices as suggested in Lin, and that is the pedagogical process of Wittgenstein. Excellent to point it out, Kalle.
Mm. Hmm. So, so
And we also have the different methods. That is also an important pedagogical tool of Wittgenstein. So he uses continually two different methods. First is defending, oh, first is attacking actually, not attacking or arguing against something. And that could be rule following. And then, as you pointed out here, Kalle, he usually, in the voice of the commentator, his second voice, he goes in to defend.
Let me see, we could actually also look on the following paragraph with your permission, Hans. Can I read it? Do we have time?
Well, a little bit. I think we've drawn over time, but put another 5 minutes, something like that. Yeah, sure.
What are you saying then? Comes to this a new insight. Intuition is needed at every step to carry out the order plus and correctly. To take it correctly, how is it decided what is the right step to take at any particular point? The right step is the one that is in accordance with the order as it was meant. So when you gave the order +2, you meant that he was to write 2002 after 1000, and did you mean also, did you then also mean that he should write 1868 after 1866 and 100,036 after 100,000?
That's a pretty long number.
And so on, an infinite number of sentences. No, what I meant was that he should write the next number, but one number after every number. Oi, oi, oi. And from this, stage by stage, all those sentences follow. But that is just what is in question, what at any stage does follow from that sentence. Or again, what at any stage we are to call in accordance with it, with how you then meant it, whatever your meaning it may have considered. It would almost be more correct to say not that an intuition was needed at every point, but that a new decision was needed at every point.
Yeah, very good. The last one is the best one. And this, I might add, is one of the most difficult paragraphs in the whole of philosophical investigation. And it was not understood by Saul Kripke, who's one of the biggest interpreters of Wittgenstein. A new decision was needed at every point, so to speak. That's the circumstantial rules.
Yes, I think this is more very important, because we think that everything is deterministic, everything has a priori rules, and we go on without thinking, so to say. But instead, every new decision is needed.
Yeah.
It's not natural that 1002 should come after 1000 and so forth. Because, as we have discussed in the past, that the child learns, and we learn by using fingers. And it's not necessary that we actually lifting up the next finger in the right way.
No, exactly. And it's also, this of course is from mathematics. This is expandable to language as a whole. So that's why I mentioned Noam Chomsky and his universal grammar. So he does something similar to language, and he says there are a priori rules for all expressions in the world and all talks in the world, which makes everything that we think, talk, and speak absolutely determinable from the Big Bang.
So, if I may, I love this paper by Goldfarb, but I would suggest that one thing is here misleading wayward child. That is incorrect. It gives a misleading impression. We shouldn't. We should use, as Wittgenstein does, as student, as pupil, as Schüler in German. So we should think twice before we use this expression. It's like not like the wayward child or the parable, the parable in the Bible about the prodigal son. It's not the same thing. This is actually.
No, we can use the word pupil.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, very good. I think we how do you say, we cracked
Random.
that tough nut today.
Mm.
Do remember we are going into pretty advanced Wittgenstein reading here, and I'm not trying to make us self-important or anything like that, but this is pretty hard stuff.
Mm.
And rules play such an important role in misunderstandings of language. I'd say everyone has an idea that language is determined.
Well, thank you,
So,
Hans.
well, thank you very much, Kalle. Excellent comment, very interesting. It made my day.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, or afternoon. Bye bye for now.